Welcome to the Beehive Podcast. This is a special podcast because this is the first time we're going to have co-hosts. So this is Vince, your Chief Technology Officer and integration enthusiast at Scrub, and we want to introduce a series on this podcast called The Blind Spot, because every bit moving thing has one. Whether it's a car, a business, or even a leadership team, there are always things you're not seeing until it's too late. So this series is about helping business leaders install the equivalent of blind spot monitors across HR, finance, tech, marketing, and beyond, so we don't miss what could quietly erode growth, culture, margins, or even derail an exit strategy for us. So now I'm thrilled to introduce my co-host for this series, Caleb Young, a seasoned HR advisor from On Digital. Caleb has seen it all, from fast-scaling startups to mature organizations navigating complex people challenges. He brings a practical, people-first lens to everything from compliance to culture. And more importantly, he's someone who knows how to spot issues early on before they turn into expensive problems. Caleb, welcome to the Blind Spot. Tell us a bit about your journey and what excites you about this series.
Thank you, Vince, and hi, everybody. Pleasure to be here. So I've been with the One Digital HR consulting team for a little over a year now, but I knew them for a long time. I was, for the last 7 years, selling PEO services for one of the major national PEOs. And for those of you who don't know, PEO is just an acronym for Professional Employer Organization. And essentially, it's a business setup that combines HR technology, employee benefits, and some consulting and risk risk evasion. When I was doing that, I kept bumping into these outsourced or fractional HR consultants in a lot of the companies I was engaging with. And similar to the title of this podcast, the companies that had these fractional HR consultants in them were really able to see around the corner and have less of a blind spot. They knew when to engage a PEO, when to leave one, what other HR resources to use, compensation to be competitive, all the things. So was always super impressed, traded lots of referrals because it was really a complementary and needed service in my perspective to the overall platform. And so fast forward to present day, we joined forces and I think now have a really compelling, complete perspective of the HR landscape. Excited here to talk about what I think is really an overlooked um, concept of HR and finance being two sides of the same coin. So to join me, I've got one of my colleagues at the One Digital HR Consulting team, Erin, who has done it and seen it all, I think, from the embedded HR perspective as a consultant. And will really give us a lot of perspective from the ground level of what's going on.
Yeah, great. Thanks. I'm happy to be here. As Caleb mentioned, I have been in the HR space for many years, many years. And I started in the PEO space as well. And then I've also been in in-house HR. And then have been with One Digital for 4 years now. So I've seen all sides of it. And I'm excited to share some information with you all.
Fantastic. Welcome, Erin. And also joining us today, as well, is someone I've had the privilege of working with closely. Tina Tan, super sharp and strategic fractional CFO who's worked with a range of companies at different stages of growth. And, she brings a financial lens to every conversation. But what sets really Tina apart is how she connects the dots between numbers and people. She's helped companies navigate everything from investor reporting to workforce planning. And today, she's here to help us unpack how HR decisions ripple across your P&L and valuation. So, Tina, welcome to the Blind Spot.
Thank you, and hi to everyone. I terms of experience in addition to what Vince had said, I'm a CPA with over 30 years in finance audit and operations. I've worked in public accounting and corporate roles, and most recently led global finance at a solar tech company in the Bay Area, steering M&A, capital planning, keeping the numbers steady while everything around us moved fast. Earlier in my career, I spent years in audit, building systems and controls that help companies grow without losing control. I've worked across industries, real estate, banking, software, renewables, you name it, and across stages, from early planning through IPO prep. One deal really stuck with me. HR had gotten top heavy, big titles, big salaries, but not much depth. It showed up hard during due diligence. I nearly saved the deal. That kind of misalignment, like in my mind, totally avoidable. If finance and HR had aligned sooner, if the organization had been built with the next phase in mind, not just the current one. Today, I co-lead the Sites Group, working with Vince. We work with early stage teams, especially in science and deep tech, helping them shape their financial story. So they're ready to raise, scale, and grow without friction. I'm really glad to be here and looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you so much, Tina. I'm really, really glad that you're able to carve out some time to join us today. So, with Scrub as our client's partner in financial operations, we're constantly helping them optimize, their balance sheets and their future plans. But today we really want to talk about the often, as you have mentioned earlier, Caleb, an often underestimated pillar that impacts everything. It's your people, your human resources. So your books might be clean, your strategies clear, but if you don't have the visibility into your people, your tools, or your risks, that's the blind spot that can really stall your momentum, as what Tina had alluded to. So a gap in HR excellence can seriously undermine even the best financial and strategic plans. So we hope to unravel why investing in top tier, HR directly impacts the financial and strategic outcomes you're really already striving for. So let's jump right into it. Yeah, let's talk about how HR directly impacts your financial health. So Erin, at Scrub, I often look at financial reports that don't quite add up. And more often than not, the cause isn't just financial. It's a people issue hiding in the numbers. And whether it's high turnover, inflated payroll, project delays, the blind spot is usually somewhere in the people, in HR, right? Not in the department, but in the function, of people itself. So from your experience, from the get-go, how do you set up a well-run HR function that really directly protects the bottom line? And what's the blind spot to most companies that they should be paying closer attention to?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you. You know, First and foremost, your people are your biggest cost, right? They're, your salaries. And if they're not productive, if you don't have the right people doing the right things at the right time, it bleeds into your, it's like, oh, now we have this person, right? So I go back to management and making sure you have strong managers because they're the ones that impact the day-to-day and the relationships with people. They're typically the ones hiring. They're typically the ones they're giving the feedback and managing performance. And when you have often the companies we work with, they're a group of really high-performing people. You get these really high-performing people in and you bring in one person that's not performing at that same level as everybody else, and suddenly your morale goes down. And now you have these blind spot hidden costs of people complaining to one another about so-and-so is not doing their work where they could be focused on their work. Or, they have someone who's maybe deliberately or not deliberately undermining the work. And so things they're not capable of doing the actual work. I had that recently with someone where I was like, do you actually have you done this work before? Because I'm curious about that, right? So making sure that you set expectations from the beginning, that you provide feedback throughout, and that if you need to make an exit, you don't drag your feet on it. You know, my entire career, this happens where people have managers have this idea of well, if I don't say anything, they'll figure it out and they'll just leave. It very rarely works that way. So it's much better if you're setting the expectations, if you're having those conversations, and if you need to exit, that you move forward on that. And that you move forward in a way, maybe you have to pay a little bit, right? To have this person go, And that's okay too, because that's the other conversations I have, is better to do this now than to wait for a lawsuit and having to the time and energy, again, more sort of hidden costs. And so for me, it's really about making sure you have the right people, you have them at the right time, and setting that up. So setting up hiring practices, make sure we're training our managers, make sure some of those procedures are in place, make sure you're having a good onboarding experience for employees because they're making their mind up on day one. And, making sure that we go through that process. And even on onboarding, I have a client that I joined and they'd been around for a while, but they were smaller and they were growing pretty quickly. And when I joined, they had no electronic means of doing anything. So employees were joining with paperwork, filling out paperwork. And I was like, uh-oh. I was like, you're going to have people join and they're going to be like, what is this company? They have like or people who are like, I don't know how to fill out forms. Don't you have something online? So we were able to move them to an online system where everything was then integrated. So speaking of finance, it moved right into payroll really easily because it was all in the same system. And it's the responsibility was on the employee. You didn't have any issue of someone keying in information wrong. Everything was, sort of seamless for them because otherwise it's an odd experience to join a company in 2025 filling out paperwork.
No, so that's, I mean, that kind of touches on, I think, part of this blind spot, right? When we talk about the employee experience and how even just something like paper can like
Yeah.
impact their perception of the company they just joined day one. Is that part of like employee perception and our employee value perceptions changing post COVID and modern day about what's valuable in an employer?
I mean, yeah, I think, sure. I mean, that to me, that's the bottom line, like, bottom of the pyramid, like have your paperwork not be handwritten paperwork. Have that experience be good, but also be thoughtful about your experience. Don't just, have someone join. I joined a company, it's pre-pandemic. I had joined a company. It's like, I didn't have my laptop for 2 days. And I don't know about you, but there's not much I can do in my job without having a computer anymore. And so making sure that you just have those things set up. And again, some of that's coordinating with your partners in finance and IT to say like, hey, we have this person's joining and let's make sure that they have the equipment that they need. And so a lot of times when we join companies and we're helping them, it's putting those processes in place. Like it's like a simple checklist, right? It seems, like, oh, of course, it's just the checklist. But it is such a simple thing to say, okay, maybe you haven't hired a lot before, so you weren't thinking of these things. It's like, all right, here are all the things we need to do. Here are the people that need to hear things. Finance being a great partner of like, hey, we have this person joining. They're getting a signing bonus. Let's make sure it gets paid, right? And here's the documentation, so you have it for your records as an audit trail. And keeping those things in mind. I think, Tina, you mentioned this in your intro about, thinking for the long term, not just the short term, right? So making sure that like thinking with long term in mind of like maybe an M&A or an IPO, it's like, oh, we need all the resumes. Oh, we need all this documentation and not having to scramble for it later, right? And so to your point on the employee experience, I think everything ties into that of just looking like we have our stuff together, looking like we're a coordinated and, buttoned up company, and that people don't feel like, oh, I joined a company that doesn't know what they're doing.
I would kind of think that. I recently realized I have a really hard time handwriting nowadays, and I'm sure I'm not one of the only ones. Um, Tina, so to you, a lot of companies, right? So now that we're getting into kind of the long view, right, and really keeping the long view in mind, um, a lot of companies when they get started see HR as a back office function. When you advise a client through raising or an acquisition, how does the way they manage people, compensation, hiring, or design, all those things, how does that affect how investors or acquirers perceive that company? And what are the red flags or signals that the company's ready for big time? Oh, I think you're on mute.
That's a very good one, Caleb. So people costs are one of the first places we look during due diligence. If comp structures are all over the place, hiring feels reactive, there's no real logic behind the org chart, that's not just about bloated costs. It signals deeper issues. You know, it tells investors the company isn't ready to scale because the foundation is not there. I've seen this play out firsthand. In one deal, the company had layered in a bunch of senior HR roles, VPs, directors, but there wasn't enough depth underneath. High salaries, not enough execution. It raised real questions about judgment and cost discipline. And it nearly derailed, the acquisition. On the flip side, when HR costs are clean, when comp bands make sense, hiring plans match growth strategy, and org design is aligned with where the company is headed, it shows maturity. It shows the team is thinking ahead, not just putting out fires. And that makes whole business more attractive, whether you're racing or being acquired. Yeah. So that's what I think
That
about.
makes so much sense, Tina. And it's investor can really quickly tell whether your people strategy is intentional or reactive just by looking at the numbers. So Erin, let's take a little bit step further on this one. Even if a company has a thoughtful HR strategy, if the data behind is scattered, inconsistent, outdated, it's really hard to prove that impact, especially to finance or outside investors. So how does an effective HR system look like? What does it look like so that it connects and aligns with financial reporting?
Yeah, I mean, you'd want to have an integrated tool and ideally something that can help you with forecasting, right? That can help you say, like, okay, here's what, we need based on, whatever, whether it's, hey, we're going to file our first IND and then we're going to move into the clinic and this is what it's going to look like. Or, we expect our revenue to go up X amount. And so we're going to need more people to support that. But being, to Tina's point, thoughtful about that. And one thing I wanted to add, you mentioned, it made me think about around the titles and having inflated titles. I see that so frequently. And again, it's short-sighted. So one of the things I like to talk about a blind spot, one of the things I like to mention to clients is like, are we setting someone up to fail? Meaning that if they leave this organization and join another organization with this same title, is that organization going to be like, ooh, wait, they're not really a director level? And so being honest about where people are in their skill set doesn't mean we can't develop them, but a development strategy isn't just giving someone a new title and that's it. And so it's really about the work that they're doing and how can we help support them in their growth and their professional growth that's not just tied to a title or tied to a salary increase, thinking for the long term, setting them up for success, whether they're with the company or not. So I just wanted to add that because you said that and it made me think of like, oh, I see this so often. But wanting, back to your systems question, making sure things are integrated, making sure that you're not. I often see a lot of things cobbled together or a lot of things in spreadsheets and not in a system. So a way, if you can have a system, like an HRIS system where everything's integrated, right? So your payroll's in there, your benefits are in there. Maybe, hopefully your performance management's in there, training, everything you can sort of report out from one place. It's sort of your one source of truth to be able to pull that information. It can be so much more powerful than trying to pull together a bunch of different things. And maybe my spreadsheet says something different than Tina's spreadsheet. And then the CEO has a different spreadsheet. And so then that can just, lead to a lot of confusion. Then you're like, well, which one's the source of truth? Right. So having a system where like this is the source of truth, nothing against spreadsheets. I live in them. But, being able to work through that and say, OK, here's where, I'm pulling this information from this system. That's where it's at. And without having to go back and forth, I had this happen recently where, our bonuses, some people had bonuses, some people didn't, and they weren't all in, like people had different records of them. And I was like, listen, there is a field in our HRIS system, so I'm going to put this in here. So at least that what's in here is what we know right now. If it changes, we can update it. But again, we have this one source of record, one source of truth. The other thing, Tina, you mentioned was like sort of was on compensation, right? So a big, a lot of states, California in particular, but a lot of states have pay equity laws. And we want to make sure that we're paying people properly and that, we're sticking in with our guidelines. You have to post in job ads. So other little blind spots of things that just people don't know, right? Which is, oh, in California, you need to post the hiring salary in the job ad. Oh, I didn't realize I had to do that, right? or other states have that as well. So just making sure that, you're dotting your I's, you're crossing your T's, and that like in your comp structure, which, certainly can change because salaries change over time, but that you're sticking to that so that you have something to defend and say like, hey, listen, this is how we pay. This is where you are in your range, in the range, and that when you're bringing in new people, you're not bringing in people way above where other people are. Because again, this is where you get into this pay inflation. Well, this person wanted to join and we really wanted them, so we threw more money at them. People talk, and whether we like it or not, they're going to talk, and so then they're going to find out, and you're going to have more issues on your hand.
So, Erin, already I'm thinking like, wow, you and Tina need to be in lockstep together. How often are you engaging with the financial leadership CFOs at companies, and do you think that's common practice with HR and finance, or is that part of
It's
this
been
overlooked
common
blind
practice
spot?
for me. I don't know. I
Okay.
hope it's common practice for others. Tina could probably answer based on her experience.
But based on my experience, I mean, at least for the ones that I've been, like leading finance, I've always worked with our HR lead, to work on this because just like what Erin pointed out, you don't want to be scrambling through things when they're needed. You want to be, oh, you need this. We need to get from Erin. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I feel like we're best friends. We need to be best friends. We need to work, we need to have a really close working relationship, and we have different roles, right? But they complement one another, and we need each other to be successful.
Makes sense. Well, I appreciate that, and I think that's really the piece that so many businesses miss. That these aren't just HR nice to haves. And Tina and Vince, when you look at the numbers from Scrub's side, forecasting, looking at cleaner books and headcount planning, I think a lot of it sounds like starts with how the people are managed, and it comes down to that strong HR isn't really, as a lot of people think, a cost center, but it's a profit protector, an efficiency driver, and it shows up on the financial statements, or doesn't, and is part of that blind spot of like where is this gap, right? Um, so it sounds like it gives a lot of clarity, and you can kind of read through the trees or whatever that saying is, and kind of see what's going on. Um, yeah. Curious how that really impacts the message to investors, acquirers, and as we're talking about this, kind of shifting gears, Tina, we've talked about strong HR practices and how they show up in the numbers in investor conversations. Taking that a step further, how would you position HR as a accelerator for growth? And meaning not just a function that keeps things compliant or efficient, but from your perspective, as a CFO in startups, when a company is getting ready to scale, hiring lots of people, evolving leadership, what signals tell you that their HR functions are ready for prime time, ready to support the growth? And what happens if it's not?
Well, our work in TSG is really about helping companies build for what's next, whether you're scaling or raising capital or getting ready for an exit. And HR plays a vital role in this process, in each of these stage. A lot of thing, a lot of like, I would say a lot of my former team members think that growth is all about hitting revenue targets or entering new markets. But in reality, growth stress tests your people before it stress tests your number. I think that's the thing that people miss, and working closely with HR, you know, that one is more like less of a problem for me. But it's more that I observe when I was in public accounting doing M&A, seeing this through. It's a common problem because, I mean, of course, hitting your revenue targets, entering new markets is always a, a requirement, a plus. But, you know, that function, HR function, is pivotal to all of these stage in your business. So I've seen this play out in companies onboarding, 15, 20 people in matter of weeks, or going through even a founder to CEO transition. If the HR function doesn't evolve with the business, things break. Alignment, just what Erin said, culture, even decision making. But when HR is strategic, when there's a clear people plan, system, HR system that actually supports scale, and a leadership team that's thinking about the organization design, the way that they think about product roadmap. It's the same thing. That's when companies move faster, not just grow bigger. It's the difference between scrambling and scaling. Yeah, as Erin pointed out earlier. Yes, yes, that's correct. Yeah, yes.
Great reminder that growth really isn't just about, spending more. It's really about spending smarter on the right things, on the people side specifically, right? So, yeah, Aaron, let's talk about that next layer, if you don't mind. Once a company decides to scale, it's not just about hiring fast, like Tina had kind of said as an example a while ago. It's really about hiring the right people, and more importantly, retaining the people who help sustain that growth. In today's like super hyper competitive market, what does it take to stand out as an employer anymore, right? And how do you help organizations build the kind of environment where top talent actually wants to stay?
Yeah, that's a great question. Some of it is first knowing what you want and what you need and where you're going to be. So that roadmap that, Tina was mentioning, it's important to know like what is our growth plan? So being able to communicate that to people. So we always try to share with people like how do you, what's your story as an organization? Like why would I want to work here so that you can sell it from that perspective, especially a lot of the companies that we work with, they're startups. So they're not going to be the giant organizations that, can throw, more money at you or give you like all the perks in the world, right? So typically these are organizations that are really mission driven. So making sure that people understand what that is and that you have a clear story, particularly as a hiring manager or as a founder to say like, this is why I started this company or this is why I joined. This is why I'm here. This is what keeps me here. And being really clear though on what you are and what you aren't, because you're not going to be for everybody. And that's okay. I had a client who had a very, very loose, like they were loose structure. They didn't, it's like literally people would start and they were like, okay, you're in the lab, you're on your own. And it was, and the people who thrived there loved that environment. The people at first we had someone, it was a little bumpy. They did fine after a while, but it took them a little bit longer because they were used to more structure. So when I joined, that was the first thing I did is in interviews, we talked about the environment and what the structure was like. And I always started by asking people what kind of environment they liked. And if I heard SOPs, structure, like anything that sounded like they wanted a lot of order, I was like, this is not the right person. So then I would tell them what the environment was actually like. And I had a couple times where candidates took themselves out of the mix. And that's perfect because while they may have been a good scientist and they would have been good scientifically in the organization, they wouldn't have been a good cultural fit and they would have been miserable. We would have struggled with them too. And I think everyone deserves to be happy in their job. So if that's the case, then, we would be doing them a disservice. And I went a step further and talked to this person in particular who come from an agency. And I said, hey, this person's really smart, really nice. I really liked them. And if you're going to continue to place them places, you may want to send them to later stage startups or to big pharma because they're not going to thrive in an early stage startup environment. And they might not know that to communicate it, but I see it. So I wanted to give the agency an idea. So it's really about hiring right and being deliberate with your culture. Your culture is going to be there whether or not you're working on it or not. So you might as well be deliberate about it and creating the kind of culture that you want. Doesn't mean that the culture is won't shift and change because certainly as organizations scale, it's a lot of the feedback I get from early employees is like, well, it's not like how it used to be, or like, oh, I was in every meeting and now I'm not in every meeting and I'm feeling pushed out. And it's like, well, yeah, the organization's shifting and changing. It's not a bad thing. but making sure that people understand it's normal. So I like to normalize that a lot with people of like, hey, this is it. I had one client where we doubled in a year. And because of that, when they did their offsite, we relooked at relooked at the values because they put the values in place when they were, a handful of employees. And it's like, well, do these still make sense? Are these still the right values for us as who we are now? Maybe and we'll double again and we'll have to go through the exercise all over. But it helped because then the people had a say, the employees had a say in like, oh yeah, these are the values we want to represent. And then on top of that, which was great, they were able to tie in a peer-to-peer reward recognition to those values. So now that they're it's not just because we all know this happens, like people like, oh, we have values, and then they get put on the wall and they're not lived, or they get put in a drawer and nobody thinks about them again. So being able to bring that, so being really deliberate about your culture and communicating that to people, both either in like through branding, through your job advertisements, in the interview process, and not pretending you're something you're not. And so making sure that you're getting the right people. You should wait for the right person. I've never seen it work out where someone decides they want to hire someone just because they need someone to pipette and whatever, we'll take anybody who can do it. I never see that work out. So it's better to wait for the right person, which can be hard, right? You need the help. And so it's like, oh, but we have this person and they're good enough. But it's better to wait for the right person than to just hire the wrong person, because the wrong person can cost you more money down the road.
Can I just say, this is so amazing to hear, because this, puts a new light on setting expectations ahead of time, right? Because, oftentimes when we talk about setting expectations, it's always output based. It's always what's on the job description against what's on the resume. Those are the expectations. But there are a lot of those, hidden expectations that needs to be front and center, just like what you mentioned as far as culture. It's just going to be the right fit for the person, and really humanizing that relationship at that level to see how can we further this relationship, going forward. So I love that aspect of it.
Yeah, and even just being human, right? I've been on the side of interviewing people. I've been on the side of waiting to hear back about an interview and that anxiety that comes up. So just having a good experience, I had somebody that just unfortunately, based on the way that the timing, they were one of the first people in. We were interviewing a bunch of people. I think it took us like 6 or 7 weeks. Then like somebody was traveling. So but every single weekend or like Friday, I would message the person. I was like, hey, just checking in. Just want to see how you're doing. Want to make sure. So, because I'm like, "Ugh, I know what it's like to be a candidate and go into a weekend being like, still haven't heard anything, So I wanted to make sure that that candidate had a good. So we finally ended up hiring this person. And then when I met them in person, like a couple months later, they were like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for staying in touch. And they're like, people don't do that, Or I was interviewing same client. I was interviewing someone that they didn't have the right skill set in the moment. I really liked them, but they just didn't have the right skill set. So I just ended the interview, and I just said, hey, I just want I'm like, they're looking for people with these sorts of things. You just said that you don't have that, so I just know for this particular role, we're not gonna be able to move you forward. And he literally stopped and says, nobody does this. He's like, thank you. Like, thanks for just being straight with me. And I was like, of course, I don't want to waste your time or my time or the client's time. And, and I did. Again, similar. It's like I enjoyed talking to him, but it just wasn't the right fit for, there's a variety of reasons why people don't get roles. But, when right away, it's easier just to be super honest than to be like, okay, well, go through the motions and then I'll get back to you in 2 weeks. And then you don't get back to them at all. And that's even worse.
And also one thing that I wanted to add, Erin, I really like your point about, communicating, like any changes, whether it be in function or roles, because they're hiring or replacing. The key thing is being able to communicate that to the to to your people, because sometimes it creates some kind of awkwardness, and people think there's uncertainty somewhere. It needs to be communicated, and I think the what you said earlier, I mean, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, or when
I've
people
I've
get promoted,
experienced
making
in
sure people know. It's like, hey, don't
yes,
go to this person for this stuff anymore. You're going to go to this
yeah,
other person. This person is doing these things. And then
yeah,
also
because
letting
sometimes
the
I
other
think, oh,
person
am I
know.
being replaced? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then letting the other person know too that, like, hey, if people keep coming to you, this stuff, make sure the other person gets it. Because if you keep answering the questions, they're going to keep coming to you.
Yes. So it's important that leadership also communicates those changes, downstream. Yeah.
Well, I mean, and a lot of this comes down to kind of just what people, the individuals value in any kind of relationship, whether that's personal or business. And as you're talking about this, Aaron, we, like you said, we've both been in PEO and now in this role and seeing a lot, and how the change in the labor landscape is kind of happening and evolving. Um, I'm curious from because you have more of a firsthand perspective. Uh, how has generational shifts in value perception changed, and how is that affecting the war for talent and these startups who are competing for the top talents and really tightly competing?
I think it's a couple things. One is generational and one just access to information, right? So people, there's social media, there's, websites where people can look up interview questions. They can look up, the salaries of companies. There's much more information available to people than there ever was before. So I think, in reviews, right? So you're getting reviewed about like who you are as a company. So people are out there talking about you, whether you like it or not. But inside the workplace, again, I mentioned this earlier, people talk and we might not like it. And, I'm of a generation where we didn't talk. But, the younger generations in the workplace do talk about their salaries and they do share and they're very transparent. So if you don't have your pay equity in line, believe me, you're going to get someone in your door being like, why is this person making literally $40 more a year than me? When it's like, if you just did your due diligence, whether it's partnering, with finance and HR and like looking through that data to say, oh, wait, this doesn't make sense. Or, like, is there a reason why this person's at this versus the other? Because they will talk. So I think, in long gone are the days where people stay in a job forever. I can tell you, like, in my parents' generation, my dad retired from a job. He was there for over 30 years, right? And every time I changed jobs, my parents like, oh, and I was just like, I'll be fine. Like, it's fine. So, long gone are the, so we need to know that. We need to know as employers that like we can't expect people to stay here forever. And, in some roles, in particular, if you're working in life science companies, there's research assistant roles. Sometimes people are only in there for a couple years and they decide to go back to graduate school. And so we know that and we can kind of plan for that ahead of time and just tell employees like, hey, we totally support you going back to school and let us know so we can kind of plan ahead and we know where our gaps are going to be from a hiring perspective. And I think, looking at things of like what motivates somebody. Oftentimes we think, oh, money motivates everybody. Sure. No one's going to be like, I'm going to work for free. That's not going to happen. And everybody would like more money, right? However, it doesn't mean that's the number one motivator for people. It might be experiences. It might be learning. It might be flexibility. I mean, look at this whole return to office debacle that's been happening, post pandemic. Who knew, right? Like if you would have asked like 6 years ago, like how much, work, coming into the office versus not coming into the office would impact culture. I don't know if anyone would necessarily have predicted of like, oh no, but people leave jobs because of the lack of flexibility when it's such a small thing that you could do. It's like, okay, well, why couldn't somebody be? Now it's different if you're a scientist and you need to be in the lab, like you can't be doing your lab experiments from home. There are some roles that need to be in the office. But for the most part, if there is some flexibility, maybe that's the thing that keeps the person engaged and keeps them motivated. Maybe they would even be like, listen, I'd take less money if I could work from home all the time. So I think it's asking people and not assuming what motivates somebody and just asking them. I think we have a practice within One Digital where, managers will say to people like, what are the 3 things we could do to like, make your job better? Now we might not be able to impact, 2 of them, right? But we might be able to impact 1 of them. But if we don't ask, we don't know. And so being able to tailor that to people's needs, I think is really, really important. So just making sure you're paying people fairly, that managers know what the policies are and they're treating employees fairly and consistently and the same. Because again, that's where you'll get into trouble. It's like, oh, well, this manager did this for me, but not for you. Well, why is that? And then people fill in the blank with what the reason was. It's normally never positive. So, making sure that your managers are trained, they know what the policies are, they're applying them consistently, and that you're checking in with your people as humans. I love to say people before process, right? Checking in with your people, making sure that you know what motivates them, you know how they're doing, you know what's going on in their lives, not in like a stalkery kind of way, but that you can then help them, get to where they want to be, even if that means that they end up going somewhere else some other day, because who knows, maybe then they'll be your next customer. So I worked at a law firm for years, and that was one of the things when people left they decided they didn't want to be at the law firm anymore. If they went to a client, great, that could be a future client for us.
So no, I was just gonna say it sounds obvious, but it's usually those obvious things that get overlooked of like ask what people value. But I can imagine being a team leader in a startup or a small team, thinking like, how do I approach this? Right? Is it a right? Like, is it an informal like just walk around the room and small talk with people or send out surveys? If you're in a startup and kind of unsure how to even start approaching this, what's sort of the simple way to do this effectively and get that true feedback from your team?
I mean, I'm hoping, and if you're not, please do this, having one-on-ones with your employees. And that's the best place to do it. Those are your opportunities to give feedback in the moment, to reset expectations, to get questions answered, to help with their development. And I'm not talking about hours or days of time, a 30-minute meeting once a week. What are you working on? How are you doing? Checking in. And in the very beginning of the relationship too, just saying like, hey, I'm a big fan of like a user guide and, and some working around like, how do I shortcut someone getting to know me? And so part of that could be like, hey, what motivates you? It's like, oh, you know what? I really like to get, money motivates me, because some people that will be their answer. And other people like, you know what? I really want to have autonomy over how I do my work, or I really want to have the opportunity to do this kind of work. And so I think that's where it's just those one-on-ones.
I'd like to share that in one of the companies that I work for, what we did actually, on top of what you're saying, Erin, was we did a survey.
Mm-hmm.
Like we kind of summarized 10 things that would motivate people and send it to the employees, rank them. And you'll be surprised.
Yeah.
Money was not number one.
It very
It
rarely
was
is.
having work-life balance
Yep.
was number one. And two, having a say of like not just being like the bosses hovering over them.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's there, you'll be surprised, like
Yeah.
we were surprised with the outcome of the survey.
I like that
That
for
money
like
was not top of
the
it.
system, right? I like that for the
Mm.
company in general, but still you probably had somebody that answered money on that.
That's right. Yeah,
To
we
know
still have.
who answered
Yeah,
money.
but it was not in the top 10.
Right.
It was in the bottom. In the bottom, like
And
we
here's
we
what
had
I like
10
about the survey
motivators.
is that
He
you
was.
kind of help you figure out what we might want to do as a company around benefits, compensation, that sort of
Yes.
thing. Because then at
Yes.
least here's where the majority of people are. You're always going to have outliers, right? But
Yes.
then also sort of one-on-one asking people. But I do like that from a systems perspective too, of like,
Yeah.
oh, do we need to increase our benefits contribution? Or do we need to add life insurance so we didn't have that anymore? Do we need
Yes.
to offer more, paid time off, whatever, whatever's motivating people, because then you're hitting the majority of folks. You're still going to have these
Yeah.
outliers, but yeah, I like that.
Growth is tough, man. It's not just about like numbers game. It's not always just about increasing your sales. It's really largely a people challenge, right? Because you're not going to grow without leveraging it with additional people. So, how you motivate people beyond having a ping pong table, I guess, back in our day.
Really ever work?
So, whether you're trying to scale quickly or merging teams, you're shifting your strategic focus, there's always something, happening within the company. And it's often the human side, the people side of it that really gets overlooked and underestimated. I mean, that's obvious with all of the conversation that we've had. So, and Caleb, from your experience, how can companies make sure that HR gets ahead of that curve, right? Because especially with generational shift and things, right? What's an HR foresight that can help a company navigate any type of major transition, not just efficiently, but in a way where people are kept engaged, they're aligned, and they're moving in the same direction together.
Yeah, for me, I think it's please involve me, not me, but like, but HR, involve your HR partners and involve your finance people as well, because we're going to look at things from a little bit of a different perspective, but still having the whole picture. Because there's a lot of different things that we've seen, and someone who has a lot of depth and expertise in HR can look at like the different things to say, okay, here's what I've seen at other places. Here's the best practice. How do we want to do, like, what would work for our culture? I'm a big believer in being as transparent as possible. I say that because you can't fully tell people all the things all the time, but being as transparent as you can, because if you don't, people are going to make up their own stories. So I'd rather us be able to control the narrative and share, like, here's what we know, here's what we're working on. We'll give you an update, when we can, depending on what it is, right? I think also making sure that your managers are aligned, because where I see things fail and take sort of a left, no, I guess this way, a left turn, is when you're in a room, management's making a decision, managers are finding out things, and there's dissension, right? Some people don't agree, and then they don't agree and they leave the room and they're telling there was no agreement on when and what we're telling people. So some groups are hearing things, other groups aren't. So then some people feel left out and some people feel in the know. Then you have managers who are like, I don't agree with this. And so then that tanks your change efforts, because now you have managers who are telling, who aren't on board with the change, which then good luck getting those employees or anyone that looks up to that manager on board with the change. And so making sure that, as a management team, you're very aligned on what's happening, what we're communicating, and getting out any dissension you have in the room so that we can like commit to moving forward in this direction so that we have one united front. It is never, change is never easy. I don't think I've ever met anyone that's like, whoa, change, but it's necessary. It's very common in every organization, especially in the last few years. And so I think it's important for people to understand how to work through the change process and what's normal in that process as well. Not everybody's going to be on board from day one. And how do you get buy-in? How do you get people to, move along so that you can have something roll out in a humane way and in a way where people, you're never, one of the things I say is you're never going to make everybody happy, but if you can make the majority of people like understand and be on board with the change, and then allow for them time, because often what happens as leaders as well is that we've been talking about the change for months, many months, and then we tell employees and we expect them to be where we are in the process. And it's like, yeah, well, we've been living with this for, a month, 2 months. They just heard about it. Like, give them that space to work through the change process like you did 2 months ago.
I had a sales manager who would always say the only constant is change, and just kind of drilled that into his whole team. And so, Tina, I'm curious, that kind of same or similar question to you. So, as companies think about, retention, uh, and how to maximize that during times of change. I think a common instinct is just to rely on compensation and bonuses and the obvious ones like that. But in your experience, during high stakes moments of M&A or funding, what is it that actually moves the needle for employees and gets everyone engaged and moving in the right direction?
I mean, I feel I'm just summarizing what Erin just said. Like, it's really just about compensation. I mean, I can share you another deal, another experience that I had where the turning point wasn't the new bonus plan. It was how quickly leadership could adjust equity, how clearly leadership communicates what was happening, and whether the team felt seen or appreciated. Because, as Aaron pointed out, they get lost. There's some, opposition to the changes. And, in that transaction, what I thought was, I mean, it's really a messy transition, but that's what kept people in place, making sure you clearly communicate, leadership clearly communicate the changes, what's going on, how does this affect your equity if there's a stock option plan. And that's what kept the momentum. And honestly, that's what saved the deal. So it seems like I'm repeating what Erin said, but in every phase, HR is important. It needs to be clear. Leadership needs to be clear, communicating all these changes. And there has to be acceptance also. You cannot please everybody, but at least there's consensus and acceptance, not deviating from what you want to happen.
Yeah, and your higher level HR people will be able to help in these processes. I think sometimes we're seen as like the fun police, or we're only seen as like, doing payroll or benefits or like onboarding. Like they don't see the full picture of what we can
Yes.
do. So there's like, bring us in to do this kind of
Yes.
work because we want to help you. We want this to
Yes.
be successful because you know what happens? People end up in our office anyway. So,
Yeah. They complain, what's going on?
yep.
They ask.
Well, I think if we're all saying the same thing, that tells me we're onto something. And
Yes.
and so really, it's about that kind of teamwork and collaboration between HR and finance, and having that clear line of communication, um, which and that fuels the momentum for the broader team. So each one kind of creates visibility for the other, and leads to better decisions for the organization. Um, I think we're onto something again. So, digging a little deeper into what operational synergy looks like in real life, and how do we integrate these two functions, right? Finance and HR, for people that are maybe not already doing that, or questioning like how do I get more integrated with my team, right? Um, Ultimately, it's we've identified it's what grows businesses. So, Aaron, we've talked a lot about the strategic side of HR, but um, shifting to day, when HR systems are integrated, clean, and payroll to onboarding, comp changes, all that's working smoothly like a well-oiled machine. How does that directly support financial reporting, workforce planning, and what is it that breaks down first when that's not set up correctly?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is being in communication around, as I mentioned earlier, like, making sure that, the finance team knows when people are joining, when people are leaving, when people had a comp change, when, people are going on a leave of absence, like having that communication be seamless, but also pulling them in if you're starting another system. So, I've implemented a couple leave management systems, but making sure that the finance partner is a part of part of those calls because they have different needs than I do. My needs are like, I want this person to leave. I want them to make sure they're getting, paid by the state, that we have the right documentation, the right paperwork's going out. And, finance typically wants to make sure, like, how much am I paying this person? When are they going out? So making sure that that communication is aligned. And looking too of just like I think of again the future of like audit trails. Do we have the documentation that shows this person requested a leave, or that this person got an increase, or what are those touch points, right, that they had, or even the timing of things. Like sometimes I think this will work, but then I might hear from my finance partner being like, "Oh, this timing's not quite right for this pay." Like I knew I had an employee who was going from an hourly role to a salaried role, and different pay cycles. And so I got on before I communicated with the employee of like when their first check was going to be and what date we were converting them. I had a conversation with finance to say, all right, what makes the cleanest cut for you all for this person's pay? So we came up with a date together that worked for them and for, the employee was fine. He was continuously working with us. So, it just was what can we communicate to them so that they can get their expectations of like today you'll stop, tracking your hours and move over to a salaried role. So just having those conversations around any of those touch points, and then making sure that they're in the system, and that then again there's that documentation, and everyone has access to what they need, so that if I'm out and I'm just going to pretend like Tina and I work together, and Tina needs something, she knows where to find it. Or it's like, oh, you know what, this is in the system, Aaron's out but I got it, or Tina's out but I can still run that report. so that we have that integration and that partnership. I don't need to know how to do Tina's job because I'm not going to have that same amount of expertise as Tina has, and Tina's not going to have the same amount of expertise that I have in HR, but to know enough to be able to help out in a pinch if something came up, I think can be really helpful. And having a system that's integrated can really help with that process as well.
Well, and and that I think makes a lot of sense. And so conversely, having a partner like Scrub providing clean financial data and clean books, that I think in turn ensures that HR strategies are built on clean data and good financial insights. Uh, so the Sites Group, strategic insights help us ensure that HR advice aligns with the client's long-term vision. And really, it's an ecosystem, and kind of like what we've been talking about, two sides of the same coin, and all interrelated and feeding each other. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, Caleb and Erin pointed it out. We don't separate the financial roadmap from the people strategy. If you're aiming to scale, raise, or exit, the team is either your accelerant or your drag. So the earlier you integrate HR into your planning, the stronger your outcomes. It makes the financial story more believable.
Yep.
Yeah.
When HR in our world, Tina, when HR operates, at that high level, it really elevates the financial operations, and it provides the data that we need to deliver a true, strategic advice, to our
Yeah, and
clients.
that's exactly it. When we're building the financial models, what we need are grounded assumptions about people. If we're pulling it from scattered sources because you don't have the integrated platform, we lose precision.
Yeah.
But
And looking at
who's
where people are, right? Like how people's performances, like who are our top performers, who are our lower performers, because that's also might play into any decisions that get made in the future. Who has skills we can't replace? Who has a skill that like we absolutely need and cannot
yeah,
lose? Do we have single points of failure? And if so, what are we doing to make sure that we're creating some redundancy so that if someone's out, I always like to say if they win the lottery and they never come back, then,
yeah,
we can still continue on, as a
yeah,
business.
yeah. So the two systems need to talk, so that we can actually advise and not just report. I think that's the essence of it.
Well, isn't that the best part too of like having the fractional roles is like a lot of times I think companies feel like, well, I can't afford to have a CFO or I can't afford to have a chief people officer. But it's like if you're working in a fractional kind of way, you get the really good HR, the really
Yes.
good finance for just the amount of time that you need it because you can't not have it.
Yeah, yeah.
It's too detrimental not to have it.
And you're able to use your cash to other better
Right.
ones, and save use your cost effectively. Yeah.
Oh, you guys are both right. Fractional is getting more and more value right now because you're getting the expertise without necessarily, you know, bearing the overhead of the time that they're not, necessarily there. But
Right.
yeah,
Because we can
the
scale
message,
too, right?
yeah. So this whole thing, for the most part, the message could not be any clearer. The pillars of HR and finance are not separate. They're very interdependent. They're strategic partners in each area, and it really amplifies the overall business strength. So let's bring this home. Let's hear your final thoughts about this. We've uncovered what many companies miss. And, HR isn't just a support function. It's not a cost center. It really is a strategic driver. So when it's integrated with finance and aligned with growth vision, HR becomes a core part of our ability to scale, to compete, and to lead.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you for that. I think that's absolutely a takeaway is that HR isn't just overhead. It's an infrastructure, and if it well tuned, it reduces risk, increases retention, gives your business agility, and kind of lets you see around the corner and see more clearly what's ahead. So if you haven't really thought about your HR strategy or explored it recently, I think that's a pivotal thing to at least put some thought into or explore. so that I think, as the whole team here has said, everything's buttoned up and ready to go for those later stages and inflection points.
Yeah, from a strategic advisor uh, part, whether you're raising capital, preparing for an acquisition, or just simply building for the next phase, your talent strategy is part of your valuation. If it's not integrated into your financial planning, you're leaving value on the table.
And I think, if you want to win, like the war for talent, as we've been saying, right? You want to treat your HR and your finance team as part of the team and not as separate silos. We want to integrate. We want systems that talk to one another. We want to be able to have leaders who are working in alignment and moving in the same direction. A culture really that supports growth, supports people, and it's not an afterthought, that it's really part of your whole strategy.
Thanks to everyone for tuning in to this episode of The Blind Spot. If there's one thing we hope you take away, it's this. Every business has blind spots, especially when it comes to HR. It's often treated as a background function when in reality, it really is a strategic lever that can accelerate growth or quietly slow you down. When HR, finance, and strategy move in sync, businesses gain clarity and teams gain confidence. And just like a well-designed roundabout, integrated systems and aligned teams reduce friction and improves the flow and help your business move forward with confidence. So a huge thank you to Tina from the Sites Group and Erin from One Digital for joining us today. Your insights were incredible. And if today's conversation sparked something for you, we highly encourage you to connect with our teams. You can find more resources at scrub.net, thesitesgroup.com, and onedigital.com. And we absolutely recommend that you explore partners like One Digital if you're ready to take on your people strategy to the next level. So until next time, stay curious, look closer, and keep challenging assumptions. And don't forget, your next breakthrough might be hiding in your blind spot. We'll see you in the next episode. And until then, keep an eye on what's just outside of your view. Thank you.